Hello and welcome once again, my friends, to another episode of the Atlanta Film Festival Alumni Spotlight with me, your host, Keith Hannigan. Now, we're going to hop in our DeLoreans and hit 88 because our alumni are actual future alums. What do I mean? Well, I am sitting here today with the co-directors and the executive producer of a film that's going to be showing up at the Atlanta Film Festival 25, which is happening April 24th to May 4th. And I am here with the makers and producer of the Death Tour. Let me go around the room and introduce our friends tonight. We have Stefan Peterson. He is the writer and co-director. I have Sonia Ballantyne. She is also a co-director. And yeah, so the guy in the corner is Chris Jericho. He is an executive producer, and some of you may know him from the wonderful world of professional wrestling. Also, he's quite the musician, and he is showing up more and more these days in this wonderful world of entertainment that we all consume. And we will get to that, Chris. So welcome, everybody, and thank you for being here.
I think it's actually 88.8 miles per hour to get the DeLorean to fire up, isn't it?
No, it's 88, Chris. I work in film. Before we go into this, because I want to talk about The Death Tour, a film that I just watched yesterday. Chris, I've been a fan of yours for some time, and we'll get into that in a little bit. So I do want to ask you, I'm 46, man, with a 3-year-old, and getting out of bed is a bitch. I don't know how you're doing, and how is the tread on the tires these days for you?
Oh, good. Yeah, man. Just the tread on the tires. Yeah, everything's good, man. Just really kind of is still enjoying everything that I do, which is why it was such a cool experience to be involved with the Death Tour. It's kind of going back to the roots of my career in the early 90s, talking about these tours that have kind of been a rite of passage for most Canadian wrestlers and even a lot of American wrestlers as well. But I think if you're in the business, you have heard kind of the rumblings of the Death Tour. The Hell Tour was another name for it, but didn't really know exactly what that meant. It's like the hashtag IYKYK. If you know, you know. And now, everybody that's seen this documentary gets kind of a little bit more of an insight to kind of how you would cut your teeth and how you can make it to the next level, and more importantly, prove it to yourself that you could make it if you're able to do one of these tours and survive one of these tours. And it's not from a physical standpoint. I mean, thankfully, no one's ever physically died on a death tour, although there's been many close calls. But I think mentally and dream wise, dreams can die on the death tour, and mentally you can get crushed by being a part of this because it's very grueling and it's very much a self-reflection of, can I really make it in this business? And I think this documentary kind of unfolds that way and is very interesting as a result of that.
So what's interesting is the fact that I have been a fan of some of the things you've been behind. I think one of them actually premieres tonight, Chris, is the first episode of season 6 of Dark Side of the Ring. I think it
Oh,
premieres tonight.
cool.
Yeah. But so going into this and I mean, I'm a kid who grew up during the cartoon era of professional wrestling. I was 18 during the Attitude Era. I mean, for wrestling parlance, I'm a mark. Um, and going into this film really felt like, I'm like, all right, am I going to see beyond the mat? Am I going to see when am I going to see? Am I going to see the darker side of wrestling? I have to tell you all something. This is the second interview in a row where I conducted it with the filmmaker and watched the film right before the interview and had really no idea what the film was actually about. I knew the world it was in. The last one I did before was about amateur boxing. This one I knew it was about professional wrestling. 20 minutes into your film, I had to hit pause because something hit me so hard. I think it was the matriarch's character telling us what happened to her child. And then I read up about you, Stefan. and I see how you got involved and how you first became aware of this. And it was one of those things like, oh, I was going and expecting this, and it's totally something else. Tell me about explain that. Explain what that was like for you and how you got involved in all of this.
Sure. I was obviously aware of wrestling kind of growing up in the 80s and 90s. Didn't really end up following it too closely, but I happened to be in northern Manitoba, I don't know, close to 10 years ago now, maybe 8 years or so ago, when uh, I found out that this wrestling show was coming to this very small remote town. And I mean, this was a community that had one grocery store and, not a lot of like obvious entertainment for an outsider in the community for a night or two. So I pay my ticket. I go sit down, and it was the first wrestling match I'd ever seen. And there was Huskies trying to break into the room, break into the gym. There was kids throwing pop cans, and there was these full-grown adults doing backflips off the ring and throwing cans back at the kids, and I just couldn't believe it. And I was like, wow, this is a world I want to learn more about. And when I got home back to Montreal a couple weeks later after this trip, I find out that I just really kind of stumbled upon this legendary tour, and that's where kind of my fascination with this story and the world of professional wrestling began.
And Sonia, you like me are a kid that grew up just loving professional wrestling. And you made a reference, and I loved what you said here. You said that professional wrestling is kind of looked down upon, um, like indigenous people, and you wanted that to be a correlation because you grew up there. Explain what that was like for you.
Yeah, well, the reason I got so interested, like, Steph was the one who brought me on. Like, he had been working on it for about 8 years, and I came on like about in the fourth year. And I was always interested in showing Indigenous folks and pro wrestling in a way that hadn't really been seen before. Because, like, I remember when me and Steph first met, I told him I wanted to take pro wrestling as seriously as like as cancer basically. I wanted to portray it in such a way that I always saw it as, because like when pro wrestling hits, it hits. Like it can be such an amazing experience to experience live. And so I wanted to capture that. And plus I also wanted to capture the specific audiences that are on the death tour, because when I first got on the film, I was like, why is this still going on? Like, why is this still such a popular thing? And then I saw it's not just because the wrestlers enjoy it, it's because the audiences really love it. When we filmed Death Tour, it was after I think 2 years where Tony didn't do the tour because of COVID. And so it was the communities we went to really embraced it, just because they were so hungry for entertainment for so after going without it for so long. And so it was a completely different experience than I ever thought it was going to be. And plus I also really love that I remember the first stop we had on the death tour, I was like, death tour, this isn't that hard. And then by the time we got to an actual reserve, I was finally seeing what Chris and other alumni of that tour were discussing when they said, like, this is nothing like you've ever experienced. And it wasn't until we went to the first reserve that's when I was like, yes, this is why they call it the death tour, because the audiences were so insane and they almost broke the ring.
Well, there's a part right there, and I want to keep going on that thread where it's called the death tour because the wrestlers kind of almost they're having their psyche tested, not just their physicality, but their psyche. You're the filmmakers doing the tour with them. Was there a point you're like, this fucking shit sucks? I'm just done.
Well, for me, I grew up in this type of environment. I grew up without access to like running water and toilets when I was a kid. So it wasn't too much of a stretch for me just because I remember I think it was the cameraman Van who was telling me like, Sonia, you're dealing with this quite well. And or me and Sage, the matriarch, were dealing with it well. And I'm like, well, I grew up like this. It's not comfortable, but it's all right. And so it was, we actually didn't have to wrestle, but like we had to get up an hour earlier than everybody else. So if they were getting up at 5 to travel out at 6, we had to get up at 3:34 just to be certain we caught up with them. And so it was tiring. And so I will admit that when the sound guy was allowed to leave a day early before everybody else, I hopped in that car just because I was like, I'm freezing so much. It reminded me, I was glad to have been able to handle it, but I was also very, very happy when we got to the end of it, just because it's such a whirlwind and like you feel like you're flying by the seat of your pants the whole time, and it was just a great time, but very tiring.
Stefan, same question. Was there ever a time you're like, oh, what did I get myself involved in?
You know, I kind of knew what I was getting involved in. I think I'd gone up a few years before to film the sizzle reel for this, and I'd kind of cut my teeth on a bunch of these types of like locations, filming, crazy things in tough places, and including these communities for a few winters before this. But the challenge for me was that, I mean, we filmed for, I think it was like 20 days straight with no kind of, the day we intended to take a day off, all sorts of stuff happened. So we had to film, and I bought despite having 4, 5, 8, 10, however many years to prepare for this, I still went on to the trip with a $20 air mattress, very ill prepared for the sleeping arrangements. And every morning I woke up on the cold floor. And so that definitely ate away at me after, the 2 weeks of the trip. So yeah, the sleep thing was tough. And by the end, we were so tired that even like the MRE food we were eating, which is just like put hot water in a bag of powder, even that felt like too much work. So we all lost a bit of weight there on the trip, I'd say.
Chris, what year were you on the tour?
So I'm a interesting story that I went on the tour in the summertime, way back in 1989. So I saw the summer version, which would be the sequel.
Now, I want to pivot to the characters. I'll get to Chris when he gets back, but I want to pivot to the characters that you told the story about. Okay, the story is about 5 people, really. You have Tony Condello, who is the promoter. Am I right by calling promoter? Okay.
That's right. Yeah.
You have Sarah McNichol, who is the French. She's French speaking. We were talking, Stefan, earlier, you and I, about my frequent visits to Montreal when I was a kid. But and you, Des, I don't know if it was my tinnitus or I don't know if I was just not paying attention or I didn't hear it. Des had one of the best names, the Eskimofo. Had no idea until I was researching. I'm like, oh my God, that's great. Why didn't I hear that? How did you? And the matriarch, obviously. I mean, I'm it's tough because I don't want to spoil. I don't think I'm going to spoil things, but she sustained a tragedy with a child that's the same age as my son. And that was where the movie hit me like a ton of bricks. And you're just like, oh, you okay. And then there's scenes with her and the children, which are just bravo to you too. This film was beautifully shot. You had, like, when we were looking up skills to promote your film, you have some gorgeous, gorgeous skills. And one of the best ones is of the matriarch holding her fist up with the eagle in the background. I think it was an eagle in the background. And seeing how just these children responded to both her and a lot of the girls. It was a heavily amount of girls that were responding to the 2 female wrestlers, which was, again, something I just wasn't anticipating for watching a movie called The Death Tour, folks. I mean, you're just really not. And so it was wonderful. How did you decide? And I don't want to, by the way, Sean Dunster and Sage, Sean Dunster, I do not want to exclude him from this conversation too, because he is the vet, if you will. And how did you decide to land on their stories for this? Because I do have a question. There was a longer hair, mustache, younger looking wrestler who you could watch. You were watching. I think you wrestled against Des when Des
Levi. Yeah.
yeah, he pancaked him in the air for that one point, and you could tell this guy could wrestle. You're like this guy, he has moves. But how'd you decide to land on those four? And a quick follow up: was there anybody on this tour who actually went on to anything and then one of the bigger promotions?
I mean, I think one of the things I discovered about wrestling, and that was, a lot of fun when I kind of started researching this world, was like everybody is a character. Every wrestler I spoke to, every alum I spoke to in the research of the project, each one of them had an incredible story. I don't know what it is about wrestling that kind of draws this like amazing cast of characters together. And so, I think maybe 12 or so wrestlers did the trip, and each one of them had an amazing, like literally each one of them had an amazing story. And it was devastating having to kind of whittle it down to 4 or 5. Um, we could make a total other film with all the footage that was, on the cutting room floor. And it wasn't necessarily who was the best wrestler, but it was, what we were looking at was who gained the most from the trip in terms of, learned a lot, experienced a lot, for whom was it, their first trip, and for Sean it was, potentially his last at the time. So that was kind of the tough choice that went into choosing who ultimately made it in the film. But yeah, that was some of the biggest internal arguments with the team, was who stays, who goes, because the film was going to be 3 hours long otherwise, and so yeah, we had to make some tough choices.
I think when you're doing a documentary like this, like there's two types of documentaries, right? There's a Beatles documentary where we show them recording Get Back and the Let It Be record, and it's documented, and here's the footage from 60 years ago, and here's what we have to make. With this type of a documentary, it's unfolding as we're filming, and I think that's always the way it shows up, where you'll get your group of characters in the story, and you'll be like, okay, this guy's going to be great and this girl's going to be great, and maybe they're not. But as the story unfolds, then the Deses come out, then the matriarchs come out, then the guy that you thought was going to be the lead kind of goes back to 7th or 8th on the call sheet. And I think that's one of the brilliant things about the Death Tour, especially making it. Like I've said many times, when I came on board, I was envisioning a completely other documentary, kind of like Stefan said, like almost like, here's a retrospect of all the guys who have been on it, from Chris Jericho, Kenny Omega, Don Callis, Dr. Luther, Lance Storm, Ryan, whatever, Edge, Christian, blah 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 blah, telling funny stories about Tony and all the ridiculous things that happened. Early on in the process, I realized this is not the documentary that I expected it was going to be. It's way deeper and much better, with all of kind of the personal stories, the tie-in with the Indigenous communities, which I just thought was unbelievable. I never even thought about that before. Even though I didn't go on a death tour, I've toured all of those towns, whatever we call them, reserves, hamlets, villages, and just to see kind of all of that coming to life as you guys were filming was brilliant. And that's one thing I really loved, even for me as one of the producers of the movie. It was not what I expected, but once I started figuring out what it is we were doing here, it just became a completely different film for me in all the best ways. And we still have the elements of the ridiculous stories. And like we said, we could do a sequel of, like, Tony Condello is one of the great characters in pro wrestling history. And there's about 50 stories from the death tours that we didn't even get into. Don't even talk to me about the Jethro Hogg and the pig. That's a whole other story. But once again, I think as the story unfolded, we got so many amazing, moments of what's the word I'm looking for, of truth. You're talking about all of our main characters that were involved in the film. But I think the ones for me, once again, I think the patriarch just stood out, and then Sarah's story from Montreal. Sarah, her story was unbelievable as well. So just from being on the inside of the movie, but also being on the outside, this is not what I expected, and it became something much grander in so many amazing ways.
I think the best documentaries are the ones you go into and you completely, and even for the filmmakers themselves, If you've seen enough of them, you've seen where the filmmaker will go and go, okay, we're going to make a story about this, and then something happens, or they realize there's something better here, and it becomes something totally different, and you're like, wow, this is amazing. But the characters that we get involved with your story, like Chris, the documentaries you've described of like all these guys telling stories, we've seen an awful lot of those, especially in professional wrestling, where you really fell in love with these characters because, I mean, how can you not? You see their struggles, you see their plight, you see what they're going through, and on top of that, of what they're trying to do, and they're people seeking inspiration in a way by going out and inspiring these communities that are desperately in need of something inspiring. As Des stated, we're not trying to create. One of my favorite books of all time is Sherman Alexi's The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian. And it's about this young boy who's trying to leave a reservation. And he's trying to do it through education. And Des makes the point. We don't want people to leave the reservation. We want to strengthen the reservation. And you guys did an amazing job with the trailer, because the trailer completely screwed with me, because when the matriarch says there's been more deaths on this tour than ever before, and you're like, oh my God, how long are wrestlers really gonna die on this? And then you find out who dies, and you're like, whoa, it's a lot worse. So Chris, you just touched upon something. How did you get involved? How ultimately did you hop on to this project?
Before I answer that, I just want to kind of add on to what you just said, Keith, in that, yeah, the wrestlers provided so much inspiration for the communities that need inspiration. But what I really started seeing come through, shining through, was that the communities were inspiring the wrestlers just as much. You know, you have people in here in this wrestling group, troupe, if you will, team, company. Some of them will never make it past the death tour. They won't. That's just the tried and true story of wrestling. It's like anything else. You know, you pick up a guitar and start playing. Some of them will end up headlining arenas. The majority won't. So for our roster, performing every night in these community centers and in these small reservations, they're getting what they always wanted, a chance to be a wrestling superstar. And on that night in, Peguis or whatever reservation you want to pick, they are as big as it gets. They're the Chris Jericho, or they're the John Cena, or whatever it may be. And I just, like, when you see the matriarch and they're saying, we love you and you win for us. And like the look of happiness on her face, like she did it. She fucking made it. Like, whether she never wrestles again, she made it. And we see that quite, I mean, Dez as well. I mean, this guy has never even really wrestled before, and you can see that in the film. Like, he doesn't know what he's doing. Can you do a hip toss? No. Can you do a clothesline? No. Can you do a drop kick? No. All right, well, I'll just hit you then. Like, that's one of my favorite scenes of the movie, because he's so honest. Like, I have no idea what I'm doing here. But when he comes out, with his singlet and his can of Pepsi or whatever the hell it is, I still don't know why he had that. And people are cheering for him and going crazy for him. And it's like, in that moment, you are headlining the biggest wrestling show that you could headline. And that, to me, was some of the beauty and charm of the movie as well. And how I got involved, I'm really not sure. I think it's because I don't know. I mean, you probably might want to ask Stefan and Sonia more than me, but I just knew, because of having produced a couple documentaries. I've done 4 so far. I think it was 3 at the time, not including Death Tour, so 2. I really wanted to be involved with the projects because of my history with the business, and also kind of knowing a little bit about how to put together something wrestling wise, because wrestling is not an easy topic to film and to make into I guess, a legit story, because it's such a strange world. It's neither fish nor fowl. It's not real, but it's not fake. It's something in the middle. And I just really wanted to be involved for so many reasons. It was part of the history of my career, and as a filmmaker and as a producer and as a kind of a wrestling historian, I guess you'd say. I wanted to be involved from that aspect. But how my name came across the desks of the producers and directors, I'm not really too sure. So I asked you two the same question.
Well, you know, putting this team together took a long time, and as the project grew in scope, so did kind of our ambitions of how to put this team, you know, our goals for putting this team together. But, you know, we needed someone who clearly was an experienced filmmaker, but also someone who could help us. I mean, this was not my universe, and this was
Right.
Sonia's universe in certain degrees, and my universe in others. But we were looking for a producer to come on who could, you know, help us make sure we're not, you know, that we're telling the story honestly and in a way that will, you know, appeal that will make sense. You know, like Sonia said, she didn't want to make something that was going to be a farce, and I didn't want to disrespect the wrestling community in any way. And so we wanted to bring in an executive producer who could help us, you know, who had experience filmmaking, had experience in this world, and help us make sure we represent it honestly. And so obviously Chris was the top of the list. We're just like, okay, well, we'll try Chris, we'll see, but then let's, you know, we'll work down the list. And yeah, we were to say we were pumped when you responded would be an understatement.
Oh yeah, it was quite funny because like to see Chris start appearing in the email chain was so funny just because I'd be like, Steph, I don't wanna like mark out or anything, but it's so cool to see Chris's name in the email chain. And like just be like I think having Chris on also legitimize the production in a lot of ways in terms of like wanting to focus on the wrestling history and that side of it, just because when I first came on it, after asking Steph if he knew why they called it the Death Tour, I also asked him if he like was aware of like how seriously I wanted to take the wrestling portion of the film, just because I knew from being a wrestling fan since I was a child how people I love being able to call it the business legitimately now because I'm like a Death Tour alum. But I love in one of my favorite things about wrestling is it's such a close community. It's a lot like being Indigenous. And so I knew that this close community would be hard to get into just because it's been so disrespected in the past and people look down upon pro wrestling that I knew that we had to treat it like the art that it was. Otherwise, we wouldn't get the access that we wanted. Not that that was the only reason, but because we wanted to show the people we followed in this film who eventually became our friends, like how important this sport was because it was important to them. And so it was something that I really loved that we were able to show, well, at least personally, my love for pro wrestling in this film came across so much. So I'm glad that like my contribution to pro wrestling history was this film. So I'm very excited about that. So
It's interesting, Stefan, you made the point about the characters. Chris, you made the point about it's a tough sort of subject matter to talk about. I've been a writer my entire life. I've written a few wrestling stories and a few wrestling scripts, but I've always been fascinated by the premise of what happens if Bruce Wayne had a problem with blow. And what I mean by that is these guys were all superheroes to us growing up. But you're telling the story, and Chris, this is really to you because of the stories that you've chosen to tell about the people behind the caricatures, right? And whether it be Dark Side or even something like this, you find out these guys who go out there and have tens of thousands, millions rooting for them. When they go home, they have a lot to contend with and they have a lot of demons. Why have you chosen to go that route of really showing the humans behind this industry?
I don't know if I've made it a conscious decision to do that. I think just because I've been doing this for 34 years, you know, those stories shine through. I mean, this isn't like it was even when I first started in the early 90s, where like Sonia said, that was a great analogy, Sonia, about how the wrestling community is very much a secret society and tight knit, much like an indigenous community would be. That was a really interesting point that you just made because we don't really know a lot about an indigenous community, especially if when you grow up in Canada. I grew up in Manitoba. I mean, the province is mostly indigenous communities. You get outside of Winnipeg, where I grew up, and there's a couple other bigger cities, but mostly, like I mentioned, when I toured Manitoba, many times it was all indigenous communities, all of them. And you'd be driving a long way to get there. Like we say in the death tour, you're talking a 12-hour drive to get to a community where you might not even have the show if somebody in the reservation passes away, which we see in the death tour, which was unbelievable. The fact that that happened because, you know, it's like, once again, we don't know what we're going to get when you have the cameras rolling. And here we are getting to a community and someone's died and the show is canceled after a 12-hour drive. Like that didn't happen every tour, but it happened. And it happened during the filming of this movie. So anyways, I think just once you talk about wrestling as much as I have and write 5 books about wrestling and, you know, do the type of interviews that we do now, which is talking behind the scenes. I mean, my podcast has been going for 13 years now based on that premise, and not just all wrestling, but the true characters come through. And a character is not just on screen, a character is behind the scenes as well, which is another reason that I think Death Tour turned out so well, that Steph and Sonia did such a good job in casting this documentary. And trust me, you do have to cast it properly. You know, you have a bunch of people, 15 people on this tour. Some of them have to have personalities, and maybe some of them will. I would say that even like there's a guy in the movie called Wavell Star. I would say that when you started, you thought Wavell was going to be one of the main characters. They're both nodding their head. He turns out
Yeah.
he's a minor character in the you know overall consensus of the movie. Whereas guys like Dez and Massive Damage and the Matriarch and Sarah, those are the ones that kind of exploded on screen, and their stories were so interesting. I don't have to tell the behind the scenes story of these characters. They're doing it themselves, just with the way they act in the ring, out of the ring. So I think it's one of the most interesting things about pro wrestling is that people still don't quite understand it, even in 2025. And they probably never will, because if I would say, if you want to see the real story of wrestling, shoot a documentary about the backstage machinations, but you would never get it because as soon as the camera came on, people would not do the real story. So like I said, there's no form of entertainment like it. There's no other sport like it, and it is both. So to be able to crack open the door a little bit, like Sonia said, her contribution to pro wrestling history is the death tour, and just to see a little bit of what this is like, not just from, you know, the community standpoint or even the tour standpoint. I mean, once again, you've got people that show up, they get in a van, they drive 14 hours, they set up the ring, they do the show, they sleep on a sleeping bag in a gym community floor. Wait a second, they got to take the ring down first, sleep on the floor of the sleeping bag, get up at 6 a.m. and drive another 14 hours to the next gig. There's no glamour in that. You know, plus you're probably making, I don't know, the standard was always $50 a show. And that's never really changed in the 30 years that I've been in the business. So it could still be $50 a show. And if it's 100, it's not more than that. So you're not doing it for the money. You're not doing it for the glamour. You're not doing it for any other reason than 2 things. One, the experience of doing it, and to see, like, can you survive this? And B, the 10 or 15 minutes that you're in the ring that night with, you know, 150 screaming kids that have no idea who you are, but they're just happy to be there. And as a result, you're happy to be there, and you get that moment of glory. And that's it. There's nothing else before or after. So I think that we really tell those stories, and those stories kind of unfold on their own just by the events that are transpiring on screen.
You know, and just to echo what Chris is saying, like part of what really inspired me about this world was, and what kind of blew my mind was, after talking to countless wrestlers, was their work ethic. And sometimes like the parallel you can make as I mean, I don't love the term filmmaker, but as you know, as a person and a creative in this space, you know, you're only as good as your last gig, and there's no job security. And like what inspired me about all these guys was the sacrifices they made at home, their love life, their families, their careers. Like they put everything on hold for their passion, which was wrestling. You know, they took whatever job they could that would give them the flexibility just to like skip out on a Friday because they got a call for a $50 match, 8-hour drive away. And I don't know, you know, talking to those wrestlers over the, you know, for the years it took to kind of get this project off the ground, each and every one of them I found had the same story, and they had this work ethic, and that was, yeah, that was really inspiring. And so you know, I hope that's what kind of shone through in the film, because that's what really attracted me to this universe was these guys who put everything on the line for what they believed and what they loved.
Yeah, that's something else I really like too, is because I noticed really fast that each of the people who had something really impactful to say, or any of the great wrestlers in the past, always had something that brought them to wrestling that really connected to their heart. And so it was something we found with Des, with Sarah, like with Sage, with Sean. They all had like a dark, troubled past that contributed to why they connected so hard with wrestling. And so it was something I really wanted to incorporate, just because it's also why fans love wrestling, because it's such an accessible form of storytelling, and it's so tangible just because it's there. Like it's a completely different thing to see a wrestling event live, and so to have it be on a reservation was something that I could only dream of as a child. Like, 'cause the Death Tour never came to my town as a show when I was a kid, but like if that had happened, to have seen someone like Sage when I was like 5 or 6 years old as an Indigenous girl would have been mind blowing, because I wanted to be a wrestler when I was a kid, but I came up during the Attitude Era when there weren't very many roles for women, and so it was. I don't know. It kind of healed something in me to do this, just because I've always been looked down upon for being Indigenous or being a lady, and so to have one of the biggest heroes of this film be an Indigenous woman was something I was like, yeah. So, like even after this film, I'm like, I don't feel like I have to do another one, just because I'm so proud of how this one turned out. So I'm like, I'm gonna retire. I'm gonna go run off into the woods now.
Leave them wanting more.
Yes.
What's really cool about the characters is each one of them has something we all can relate to. Whether Sarah, because of the fact she was suffering from depression, or she was also really nervous about speaking English. And being embarrassed is something we all can relate to. Being a feeling like a fish out of water is something we all can relate to. We may have not all lost a child, but there's some of us that are parents in this room, and food tastes different when you become a parent, and we all fear that moment of grief, but we probably have experienced grief. And with massive damage, like, is this it for me? Am I giving up? Do I want to give it? And is it time for me to call it quits on my dream? I mean, Stefan, you brought up a brilliant point, and this is the thing that is there's such a correlation between you, whether you want to say independent filmmakers or independent artists and independent wrestlers. You ain't making shit for money. You probably have to have a full-time job to pay for your whatever it is that you want to do, but it's the fact you're a storyteller and you have stories to tell. Wrestling is physical storytelling. It's a play. It's this wonderful play that's being portrayed in front of you, and when it's hitting, it's Broadway. Um, and independent film and independent filmmakers, and I'm meeting them so. Obviously, we're an independent film festival. They're just doing it out of love. I mean, yeah, sure. If somebody wins one of our shorts, they could get nominated for an Academy Award. But none of them, I'm telling you, none of them walk in thinking that. They're all coming in just like, hey, I just want people to enjoy. I want people to feel something. That's what I want. And I think this film, more than anything, did that for me. It really hit emotional marks on me that I had no idea that you were going to do. And once again, that is bravo to all of you for doing that. And thank you. As somebody who loves documentary films, I have watched countless documentaries about pro wrestling. And some of them have been fantastic and some of them have been pretty funny. But for this stands out. This is I've never seen anything like this, especially in the world of pro wrestling. And for you all to do that, it was a great ride. And it's a ride I'm going to hop on again because, like I was saying earlier, you read a book once just to get the author's voice. You watch it, you read it again so you can really consume the story and get the story a little bit more. And this is something I'm definitely going to rewatch. And what's great is this is something my wife would watch. Yeah,
Well,
that's a.
Keith, if I can just jump in here, because I agree with what you're saying. And I think the reason why I love this film so much, and a lot of the people that we had screenings in Winnipeg, and we had screenings a couple of the places, and a couple of my friends came that aren't wrestling fans, they're fans of me because we're friends forever, love the movie. And the reason why I love the movie is, like you said, I've seen a lot of wrestling documentaries as well. They're always fun. Some of them aren't as good. This is more than a wrestling documentary. And I got into it thinking it was going to be just that. I learned so much about the Indigenous communities, about the Indigenous people. I mean, I'm from Manitoba, so like I'm learning things about, you know, people that I grew up 12 hours from, but it might as well be 12 days. You might as well be on Mars, and didn't really know much about that side of things until I got into the business and working kind of the indies in that world. But making this movie and just seeing just the story of the little people with Tony Candelo. I mean, what a great story. And it fits all the hats. It's Tony losing his keys, so the show can't go on because if he can't drive his car, the promoter can't get there. He's one of the best characters in pro wrestling history. You see that. And you get this great story about the Indigenous people's lore. And there's a payoff. Like it actually fucking worked. Like he gave chocolates to the little people and found his keys in his pocket. Well, I looked, and just that right there, I was like, what a great combination of all these worlds. Like if I could show one scene from the Death Tour, well, what's this movie about? Body slams and suplexes? No. It's about the little people. And that to me was why this movie's so charming and it's emotional. It gets dark at times when we talk about the plight of Indigenous, but also the plight of the wrestlers too. Like you're talking about massive damage. Like when I first started training to wrestle, if you would have told me, Chris, all you're ever going to do is 12 consecutive death tours of wrestling 2 weeks at a time, 15 matches at a time, and that's all you're ever going to do, I would have been like, I'll do it. Can I do that, please? So even though massive damage is facing this, like, should I even do this again? I want to quit. In a lot of ways, he still made it. Like he made it to a level that most dreamers in wrestling don't. So there's that side. Of course, everyone wants to get to the main event of the stadium show. Not everyone does, but he got to the main event of the Death Tour 12 times or whatever it was. So I just found there was a lot of dreams. There was a lot of education, a lot of heart that was in this film that, like you said, I could show it to my wife as well and be like, here's okay, another wrestling thing for Chris. No, it's not. It's so much more than that. Like, this should be at the Atlanta Film Festival and every other film festival, educating people about the wrestling business and about the Indigenous communities in Northern Canada. And I just thought these guys did such a great job of finding those stories, whereas I wouldn't have gone for that. And I'm so glad that you guys did, because it became so much more than what I expected it was going to be, which would have been great as well. But this was much different and much more epic, shall we say.
Thank you.
Well, just to add on that too, wrestling is like a weird thing just because like I don't know, there's a weird parasocial relationship you have with wrestlers because like we got to film backstage at AEW when they were here in Winnipeg, and it was just right after John Moxley had returned from being in rehab. And so I got to talk to him afterwards and just said like, "Oh, I'm so glad to see you back. Like I'm really happy that you're so healthy and stuff like that." And I'm like, wait a second, like where else could we talk like this to like well, I don't want to say like quote finger celebrities, but like I love this relationship that fans have with wrestlers, that it comes across in the relationships the kids have with like the matriarch and Sean and Sarah, just because like there's a lot of accessibility that isn't there in any other art form except for wrestling. And so it was funny that I was able to connect with wrestlers that I loved as a child. Like I saw, I don't know if I told you this, Chris, I saw Dean Malenko backstage at an event and I couldn't speak to him just because it felt like the Pope was right there. And I'm like, and I remember Steph was like, why don't you just go say hi to him? And I'm like, I can't, it's Dean Malenko. Like, so I was so nervous, but it's just like fun to be able to have that accessibility while also having that little bit of grandeur about everything, because it's like there's such a thin veil between like audience and performer and pro wrestling that I was really happy we were able to capture that in this film. Yeah.
So I only got a few more minutes left with you. I really could talk forever, but I'm sure Chris, you have a heart out. Is there anything that you really want people to walk away from after seeing this movie? What do you want the audiences of the Atlanta Film Festival to feel while watching this and after they watch this? Are you hoping for them to have conversations about the indigenous cultures? Because that was something I completely, like you said, Chris, I'm like, I didn't know. I didn't know nearly as much about this. Stefan, you're the writer director. What do you want the people to feel while watching this film?
I think there's many things, but yeah, I think one of the one of the main ones for me is, even as a Canadian, I knew nothing about these Indigenous communities, these isolated remote communities across Canada. So for especially Canadians to learn about this part of Canada, I think is very important. Um,
I think for me, just to kind of step on that as well, is I kind of went back to it. There's a great line towards the end of the movie that, the movie's called the Death Tour, and the experience itself is called the Death Tour. But really, it is almost the life tour, because it gives people inspiration in the ring and out of the ring. And I just really love how we see that in the film, in that the performers in the ring are giving these kids something to believe in, just as much as the kids are giving the performance something to believe in. Like, hey, I can do this, or I need to work harder, or whatever it may be. So it's a real kind of reciprocal inspiration that we see in there. And I really, really like that. I watched the movie, gosh, probably 10 times after it was finished. We probably watched it 20 when we were making it, because that's what you do. But not just watching it like in the theaters, or watching it, I just really liked some of those scenes where, I can see myself as a young wrestler in those exact same communities, remembering what it was like to have people cheering for you, going, oh my gosh, they really like me. Or, oh my gosh, they really hate me, which is, wrestling is just as good. Like,
Yeah.
I'm getting a reaction. And if I can get a reaction in front of, 100 kids in Blood Vein, Manitoba, I can get a reaction in front of 100,000 people at the AT&T Stadium in Dallas. Like, it all starts here. And I also can remember being not at an Indigenous community, but sitting in the crowd at an AWA show at the old Winnipeg Arena at the barn in Winnipeg, and watching wrestlers, being an 8-year-old kid, going, I want to do that. Like, I don't know how, but I want to do that. Like, I just can't believe how cool this looks. And here you are taking it to an even smaller, under the microscope world of the Indigenous communities in northern Manitoba, and realizing, like, we're all just people, man. Like, we're all just people. I just made a documentary about pro wrestling in Vietnam, and I just love the fact that pro wrestling was a bridge between Eastern and Western culture. And it's kind of the same. Pro wrestling is the bridge between, I don't even know what you would call it, the white culture and the Indigenous culture in Manitoba, in Canada. And we're all just people that want to take our families out, and make sure that our kids have a good time, and follow our dreams and make them come true. And we see that happening. It doesn't matter if it's at a small level or a big level. We see it actually happen in this film. And that's what I would like people that watch it to take from that. Like, dreams can come true in all aspects of your life.
There's
deep.
oh, go ahead, Sonia.
Oh yeah, same
Yeah,
thing.
well done,
I
well
just want
done.
to echo what Chris said. Like, I grew up on a reserve, and being told that Cree women weren't able to be filmmakers, artists, whatever. I think one of the things I want people to take away from the film is that, like, dreams shouldn't be based on the lottery of where you grew up. Like, Chris is probably a good example of that, because, well, and wrestling is a lot more Canadian, but like, it's still very difficult to be somebody who is not from Toronto or one of the big cities to make it in such a business. And so, like, I really love how wrestling being brought to these communities makes it a lot more accessible. Like, if Sage can do that, so can I. Just by being visible there, she has made it possible for them to aim for something else, to go somewhere where they might not have gone had they not seen her. And so it was something I really wanted to do with this film, is because I love wrestling. Wrestling made me aim for things I probably wouldn't have wanted to without it. And so I think all I want people to take away from it is like, I hope you take away the same love that I have for wrestling, and maybe end up looking at things a little bit differently that you might not have noticed just because it's a little bit different. And so I hope that's what comes across, the love and the adoration for like this weird sport.
Well, it's beautiful, and we'll wrap it on this. One of the last sequence is probably my favorite because of the fact that you have the part where all the kids are on the outside of the ring slamming their hands, literally touching the ring, like slamming their hands, and it's then followed by all the kids inside of the ring. And it was hard for me not to think back to the shot of it just kind of looked like the shot of the ECW ring that had all these people in it jumping up and down. And you're like, shit, I've never seen this before. It's amazing. And the ring collapses. But instead, this is such a beautiful moment here where you're seeing these kids jump up and down. And like Chris, you said perfectly, you go, you can't tell any of those wrestlers on tour they didn't make it. You don't have to have 75,000 people screaming your name to, I mean, I keep mentioning them, but if my 3-year-old smiles at me the wrong way, that's the only fan in life I need. And that is, I think, really encapsulated in this film. You don't need a huge amount of love to feel love. And when seeing the hugging of the girls on the wrestlers, not letting her go, when she wasn't letting the matriarch go, you're like, oh, what that must mean to the matriarch, what that must mean to Sarah is just, you can't buy that. You can't buy that. Thank you all for not only this time, but thank you for giving me that film. It was a wonderful ride. It was a wonderful experience. And to you, Mr. Jericho, I'll end on this. Sonia mentioned Dean Malenko. Man, I remember where I was when you did 1,004 holds. I remember where I was when you made the greatest entrance in the history of sports entertainment. And I will die on that hill, man. You were. This has been an amazing honor. My text threads about having this has been pretty cool. And I got to ask you something, man. I got to ask you because it's a fun conversation. Who's on your Mount Rushmore of professional wrestling?
Gosh, I just had to answer that question a couple of days ago in England. So I would say, I mean, it's who you grew up loving, right? So it's Ricky Steamboat, Owen Hart, Shawn Michaels. I mean, then I could put Hogan on there. I could put Randy Savage on there. These guys were all my heroes when I was a kid, and I think that's whatever you got into when you were a kid, you'll always remember those names as you get older. So that's who I would have to put on there for now. It could change tomorrow.
Yeah.
Well,
Well, if
it
I could
could be
add
the
mine.
patriarch tomorrow.
Yeah.
And by the way, just as a quick epilogue to this story, the patriarch and Levi, the redheaded guy with the crazy mustache, they're a couple, and they've been traveling around the world to learn their craft. And she just texted me from Mexico
Yeah.
City the other day. They were doing classes and lucha libre classes to learn that style. I mean, they're not giving up. They're traveling around and continuing this dream. So congratulations to them. And once again, like you said, Keith, when you're in that ring, it doesn't have to be the main event of WrestleMania. You're getting a taste of what it is to be in the business and what it could be, and it's very addictive. So now they're chasing more, which I couldn't be more proud of them, because the worst thing that you could do is not chase the dream. Best thing you could do is go as far as you can with it. Either it happens or it doesn't. If it doesn't, it's okay. At least you tried. At least you went as far as you could go. And they're out there doing it. So just a little bit of an epilogue for some of our characters in the movie.
Well, thank you for that. And thank you for the stories you keep telling, my friend, because of the fact, and I think Sonia will back me up on this. I'm a big New York Mets, New York Giants fan, New York Rangers too. Your father, Potvin sucks. And there was a moment this year where the Mets did something they weren't expected to, and the announcer by the name of Howie Rose, who's probably in his 70s, he goes, "They made me feel 15 years ago old again." And a lot of the stories you're telling, Chris, are making me feel 15 years old again. And that I'm 46 now, and those are some I don't want to be 15 again by no stretch of the imagination, but there's some good memories that come from those. And like I said, I remember where I was when you did this, and that's a fond place to be and feelings I don't ever want to let go of. So please keep doing what you're doing. And to the filmmakers, please keep telling your stories, because it's the underrepresented stories that need to be told. And this is the way you tell them. And if you make people feel something, they're in. You got them, and you got me. And I'm fans of you. And thank you all for being here.
Thank you, guys.
No worries. This is Keith Hannigan. Oh, by the way, you can listen to Chris Jericho on Talk is Jericho. And you can also... Chris, is there anything you need to plug?
Go watch the Death Tour. That's what I'm plugging.
Oh, you're beautiful, my friend.
Documentary of all time.
Oh, you're wonderful, my brother. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you all.
Thanks,
for
Keith.
being a part of the event.
Thank
Thanks,
All
Jared.
right, and-
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Tanya.
And on that note, thank you all for being a part of another Atlanta Film Festival Alumni Spotlight. My name is Keith Hannigan. The Atlanta Film Festival is happening April 24th to May 4th. You can buy your badges now at atlantafilmfestival.com. You can also follow us on Instagram and Facebook. You can follow the Death Tour doc on Instagram as well, my friends. Make sure you do that. You can also follow the Atlanta Film Society on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and I believe on TikTok on both as well. And on that note, thank you all again. And until next time, we'll see you at the festival.
Thanks, Keith.
you, Keith.